Hi there, my name is Jonathan Baker. I'm an entrepreneurship student in Western Carolina, and this is my future scanning presentation with the subcategory of agriculture. We are going to be talking about the evolution of beer making, past, present, and future. Quick agenda, we're going to get a little bit of an introduction, the definitions of beer, and some of the key terms within the beer making community, the origin of beer, beer today, beer in the future, and obviously my final takeaways on the subject. So first, let's get started. Some key definitions for us to go over during my presentation. Well, first, let's start with beer, an alcoholic drink made from yeast fermented malt flavored with hops. Um, so within that, you're going to need to understand what yeast, a microscopic fungus consisting of single oval cells that reproduce by budding and can convert sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. Yeast is the most critical organism when it is involved in creating beer. Malt, barley or other grain that has been steeped, germinated, and dried, and it's used for brewing and distilling and vinegar making. But for this definition, we'll be using it to describe beer. Now let's talk about the origins of beer. The earliest origins of beer, we can find the earliest evidence. Beer dates back to around 7000 BC in ancient Mesopotamia, which is modern Iraq and Iran. A lot of people consider that to be the cradle of civilization. And we have evidence of early fermentation processes also found in China, approximately 7000 BCE. So we've had fermentation around for thousands of years, but beer itself, we've been able to pretty much hammer down into Mesopotamia around 7000 BCE, because other things such as kimchi and other fermented products we have been having around for about the same amount of time. And then Sumerians and similar geographical region, and I'll show you that in a second, were the first written records describing beer recipes and production processes. And beer was a staple, and it was referred to as liquid bread. And I just wanted to show this map here because this really is going to really kind of show you where uh, beer was founded and created and discovered and utilized. And you can see Sumerians, that's where the first written recipes were. And then in this region here over Mesopotamia, where Babylonia, Babylon, Assyria, and Assur. And obviously along the Tigris River, you got to have water to make beer. That's really the birthplace of beer. And then if you zoom out, we'll go back to that previous slide real quick. Um, when we're looking at that map, you can see that ancient Egypt is just further south, but as it became more popular, you can see that beer was a daily beverage for all social classes. And as it was growing in popularity, it just became something readily available to a lot of people, especially when clean water was an issue. Alcohol was actually safer to drink. And it was brewed primarily in ancient Egypt. It was brewed primarily by women using barley and emmer wheat. And that's what's really interesting about beer is that they were using the ingredients that they had around them in order to create it. So you can see origins of flavor start to pop up based upon geographical regions over time. Now, in medieval Europe, and monastic brewing was really monasteries. Brewing moved into monasteries where monks refined brewing methods. Introductions of hops around the 9th century. So still, we're talking about thousands of years ago. We're talking about modern beer flavors being created. Most people think IPAs today are just this new thing in the past decade or two. The reality is that we are seeing these flavors start to show up in our civilization 1500 years ago. So now let's move into what we may have today, what we can recognize more today. The industrialization of brewing. The Industrial Revolution transformed beer production. We're talking about mechanization, refrigeration, and bottling. So we were able to make beer last longer, we were able to mass produce it, and we were able to automate some of the processes, which allowed some of these large companies like Molson Coors and Miller and Pabst to really explode because they were able to store their beer, which then allowed them to produce large quantities of it and then also be able to distribute it effectively across the country. And then, of course, rising of global beer brands, major breweries, as I said before, Anheuser-Busch, InBev, Heineken, Carlsberg, those are more at a global level today with mostly the introduction of refrigeration and mass distribution channels such as shipping, airplanes, and trains. They've been actually be able to distribute beer across the world. Anheuser-Busch, Budweiser, these companies, they're everywhere. Heineken, they're everywhere. And then, of course, expansion of beer into emerging markets like Asia, Africa, and Latin America, which maybe hadn't been introduced to beer because they've been more into wine or other fermented fruit beverages, alcoholic fruit beverages, or rice wine, which is very common in Asia, sake. Those are all produced in similar fashions, but nobody had really been using yeast and the combination of malt and hops like had been created in beer. So there's been a resurgence in small scale breweries in the United States. Artisanal methods, creativity, they've really risen over the past few years, and a lot of that can be attributed to most people don't notice in the United States that pre-prohibition we actually had more craft breweries in the United States than we do now. Now, that's a really important point because once prohibition happened, the only people who were actually able to survive were the extremely large breweries. And that kind of seems counterintuitive because you hear of prohibition, but they were able to pay to play. And now, as we've moved further and further away from prohibition, we're seeing that resurgence of small local craft breweries, people that have local business owners, local recipes, local ingredients. And a lot of that has to do with the changing consumer preferences as well. There's a demand for low alcohol, gluten-free, and health-conscious beers. And then, of course, as we all know, living in Asheville, the popularity of beer tourism. Oktoberfest in Germany, craft brewery tours. You can see in that image there's New Belgium, Sierra Nevada. They've created more places for people to actually come visit, and that's actually what has spurred the growth of craft breweries as well, as we can all know in Asheville, as there's over 40 breweries in Asheville now. So I'm going to take you through the process of modern beer brewing. I'm an avid craft brewer myself. I would be what is considered a home brewer, and I think it's important to understand the process of how beer is made in order to understand where we're going, right? So far we've known where beer was created. We know what modern beer is doing today. So let's talk about how beer is made so that we know what we are going to do in the future. So first we start with malting. So the raw material, grains, barley, are soaked, sprouted, and dried to prepare for brewing. And then that grain is malted and it's mashed. Those grains are mixed with hot water to release the sugars, creating a sweet liquid called wort. Yes, it's called wort. This is what I create at home in my home brew as well. And that with that wort, you then boil, and the hops are added during your boiling process. And when you're boiling that wort, you are going to add bitterness and flavor with your hops. You can also add other things like fruit, wheat, pilsner, different grains to actually get different beers as well. And then after you've boiled it, you're going to cool the beer, and you need to do that rapidly because what you want to do is settle all the sediment out of the beer. And by rapidly cooling that beer down, you can now settle the sediment out of it. Okay, so now that you've done that on brewing day, it's time to add yeast to your wort and that is called the beginning of the fermentation process. Now that yeast eats all the sugars that are in your wort, your raw beer, and turns that into alcohol and CO2. And so you let that sit for sometimes a month, sometimes 2 months, depending on the recipe that you're following or the type of beer that you're trying to create. So after you do that, you then condition your beer, and that beer rests to develop flavor and clarity over time. And after you do that, then you need to figure out how you're going to carbonate beer. Now, modern breweries actually use CO2 injection to add CO2 to the beer. Most people at home mix sugar and water together, add it to your beer, and a little extra fermentation happens in the bottle because that yeast eats the little extra sugar you put in there, and then it condenses inside that bottle, and that creates carbonation within your individual bottle. And once you do that, you've now packaged your beer, you're ready to distribute it, and you're ready to drink it. So where do we go from here? What is the beer of the future? Beer of the future, much like most things, is going to be sustainability focused. We're going to use renewable energies in breweries, solar, wind powered. You can see that at Sierra Nevada. Their entire parking lot is covered with solar panels to help offset some of the usage of power to generate beer. We're going to use water saving technologies and waste reduction systems. Now, this is really important that we use this in the future because we waste a lot of water when we brew beer. There's rapid cooling that has to occur, so you have to use water to cool beer. There's a lot of water that goes into the creation of the beer itself, and we have to be aware of our footprint. Then the ingredients we use need to be sourced locally to reduce our carbon footprint as well. If we can source hops, barley, pilsner, wheat from local places, we can offset some of the carbon footprint we have from the distribution of our beer and hopefully become carbon neutral. And then we're going to use innovative ingredients. We're going to use lab-grown hops, yeast created in a lab. There's a yeast manufacturer in Asheville called White Labs. They make their own customized yeasts to give you the most custom beer you could ever look for, and you can minimize the environmental impact when you do that. You can use alternative grains to make different beers. People are experimenting with that all the time because that's what's going to give you those gluten-free options, because there's a lot of people that nowadays have dietary restrictions. And then, of course, functional additives, probiotics, vitamins, adaptogens. These things are going to be added to beer eventually. They're added to kombuchas. They're added to different health food beverages. People are going to figure out ways to add these to beers. And then continuing on that, tech-driven brewing, of course, just like everything, technology is improving rapidly. So we have AI and machine learning for precise recipe creation, quality control, and managing the beer while it's fermenting to understand what's going on inside those fermenters. Smart brewing systems for efficiency and consistency. See, that's the key there, is consistency. The consistency in brewing is so critical because one little mistake can ruin an entire batch of beer, and for a lot of breweries that is their livelihood. That cannot happen. So using technology and AI to make sure that they're consistently brewing in an effective way and not wasting materials, time, energy, and money. And then automated customization for small batch personalized beers. This really is going to be the future because nowadays people can pay to have a customized beer made by a brewery, and they can kind of tell the brewer what they want. But the reality is if they could just go up to a counter, a screen, type in some stuff and say, hey, I want it to be fruity, I want it to have hops, but I want it to taste like this beer, and I want it to taste like that beer, then you come back in about a month and you have that exact flavor. And that kind of thing is going to be available someday. And then, of course, non-alcoholic and health-conscious beers. This is really where we're headed in the future for sure, because we have a ton of sober-conscious people, and we also have people that are sober-curious. They're looking for lower alcohol content, non-alcoholic beers, and beers that are low-calorie. We've seen low calorie for a long time, but low sugar and nutrient enriched beers so that people aren't drinking those empty calories. That's going to be really, really important for people in the future. And then moving forward with that, we're also going to continue into hyper local and experimental beers. We are going to see breweries that pop up that are on farms that grow all their own ingredients. They use all their own local flavors. They add their own limited edition batches, and they actually grow their own wild yeast as well. So you have a beer that is as local as it gets. The yeast, the fruit you add to it, to the grain you add to it is all right in-house. And then, of course, sustainable packaging. This goes to where we're headed in the future with environmental conscientiousness. There's a lot of glass being wasted. There's plastic, there's metal cans, there's cardboard. We have to figure out eco-friendly packaging, biodegradable cans, kegs, and bottles, and reusable containers and circular economy initiatives. Recycle it, get a discount. Bring your bottle back, we'll give you a discount. You're already seeing that today with things like crowlers and growlers and beyond. This is getting out there a little bit, but there's going to be new drinking experiences. We're going to have beer infused with AR and VR for branding and events. We're going to have smart packaging with QR codes for interactive storytelling and transparency. So someone's going to be able to scan that QR code and they're going to be able to know the entire origin story of your beer. It's going to be really, really exciting because now you can hear it firsthand from the person who created it, and you're not going to be relying so much on just marketing. And with AR and VR experiences, you're going to be able to have virtual bars. Maybe some people are homebound. They can buy your beer, have it delivered to their house, put it on their AR VR experience, and feel like they're at your brewery, which is just leading into more brewery tourism. And of course, our final takeaways, I just wanted to summarize some of my key points. Beer began obviously 7,000 years ago. Monks in Europe refined that brewing with hops. Uh, Global brands are dominating, but craft beer is thriving. Trends, of course, health conscious options, non alcoholic beers, and beer tourism. Those are going to be the trends that move us into the future. We have eco friendly brewing and packaging, AI, lab grown ingredients, and smart brewing. And of course, trends, non alcoholic, personalized, hyper local. The future right now is really exciting because it's more of what we're doing now, because beer has really headed in that right direction with the emergence of craft brewing, and that's what's really exciting about the future is we are headed down the right path with that, and that's what has me really excited about the future of beer. Of course, I just wanted to say thank you. This has been an incredible experience. I've really enjoyed this course, and I hope that you have learned a little bit about the past, present, and future of beer. Thank you very much.